You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Welcome everyone to Boomers Today. I'm Cynthia Perthuse, and today I'm filling in for Frank Sampson. I am so thrilled to have Liz O'Donnell as a guest. Now, Liz is the founder of Working Daughter, which supports women at balancing eldercare, their career, and much, much more. And we're going to talk to Liz in about 30 seconds. So today's sponsor is Senior Care Authority, a national elder care consulting company specializing in senior living with over 75 locations around the country. Senior Care Authority's team of certified senior advisors work in person with older adults and their families to find the best care and living options. If you have questions or need help navigating the maze of senior care and living options, just reach out to Senior Care Authority for a free consultation. And you can go to www.seniorcareauthority.com to find a local representative to get you the help you need. So Liz, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. You have a very impressive resume. So career, author, teacher, trainer, speaker, mother, daughter. I'm sure you've heard this before, but when I used to think about working women, I always was thinking about the working mother moniker, but here we are, working daughter. So how did you get there?
Well, funnily enough, and thank you for having me, by the way, I wrote my first book. It's called Mogul Mom and Maid, The Balancing Act of the Modern Woman. And it was all about what I called the chore gap. So the concept that women tend to do more housework and childcare than men do, regardless of who works, inside or outside the home. And so the idea being that women's career challenges happen before they go out their back door, never mind before they walk into the door of a corner office or, can't access the door of the corner office. So I am out promoting that book in late 2013, early 2014. It came out in October of 2013. Well, I should say trying to promote my book. And my parents were in their 80s and lived over an hour away and started needing more and more care. So there was this one particular day. It started at like 5:30 in the morning. I woke up, sent emails. I had the day off. I saw my kids off to school. I had taken a vacation day because my mother had a doctor's appointment. Drive the hour plus to take my mother to the doctor. All kinds of things ensued, missing the appointment, car trouble, my father having trouble with his computer, needing to get new updates to our prescriptions, at the pharmacy, which took forever. And also that same day, I had an article due about whether or not women could have it all to the Huffington Post. And of course I hadn't started it because I was busy. So I was dictating it into my iPhone as I was driving to and from my mother's appointment. Get home from the appointment, all I have time to do is basically brush my teeth and throw on a dress to go speak about my book that evening to a group of young mothers about, whether or not they could have it all and how to balance and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, I'm having like one of the worst days from a balance perspective. And so a day that started around 5:30 didn't end until around 11 o'clock at night. And as I was driving home, it was almost as if a light bulb went off over my head, because I remember being so tired and so stressed out about, what I had observed and what I had discussed with my mother's doctor that day. And I just had this thought, like, you know what, Liz? And my book came out a few months after Lean In, the seminal book about working motherhood. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what, Liz, there are plenty of people solving for working motherhood, but what about the working daughters? And it was just this moment, I think, at a red light at 11 o'clock at night, exhausted, when I realized daughterhood is going to be a much bigger challenge for you.
Mm-hmm. And, we talked about the fact that my seminal moment was a little bit different, but similar in the fact that I had helped my parents as a working mother and a working daughter, and got to the point where they eventually passed away. They died. But it was a 10-year journey flying back and forth from Manhattan to Dallas, Texas, because I couldn't go and drive them like you were able to do. And the fact that also there were people were calling me who were saying, oh my gosh, they weren't calling me to say, what did you do about your children? Because That was already done. They were calling me to say, what did you do about your parents? What did you do? My mother's doing this. My father's doing this. And so it was that seminal moment of, wait a minute, we're all going through this, not just women, but men as well. But as a woman who was working, it hit me like a ton of bricks that it was a problem.
Yeah. And what year was that? What years?
That was in 2018.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
probably 2016 was probably about the time it really hit, because my parents, my father had died in 2015. So it was like right in that time period.
And that was just the beginning of people talking about it, because in 2013, 14, nobody was talking about this. I had no idea that people on either side of, in offices on either side of me, were going through this. It just was invisible in the workplace. And I started Working Daughter, I think in 2015, and there still was little conversation. And now, I mean, now there's so much conversation, which is so necessary.
Right. So, toward in a few minutes, I want you to remind me to come back and ask you about what exactly Working Daughter does for people. But before we get there, you know, we only have about a half hour today, but I believe that we could talk ad infinitum. I mean, you and I have been, you know, putting our brains together before. And maybe there's about 100+ hours of great conversation around this topic that you and I could have. But I really want to dig in to how you feel about the support that you see as you're out there in your business in the workplace for working daughters. I mean, where do you see that?
I see an improvement. I see companies, I see a good amount of companies trying to do something to support working caregivers. So I'm encouraged. But I still see a major majority of companies that a majority of companies that don't get it. They just don't see it, or they think they're solving for it, but they really haven't explored what it is. And so they're not. And what I mean by that is, if you look at SHRM, which is what Society of Human Resource Managers or Management, SHRM does a benefits study every year. And it shows that elder care benefits have decreased. And you know what's increased? Company swag and like offsites and events. Well, guess what? When I was caring for both my parents and my kids were 8 and 10, I wasn't going to any company outings, and I didn't care what t-shirt you gave me. You know, I needed flexibility. I needed resources. I needed somebody who understood why I wasn't showing up for work in the way I have been showing up for work for years. So the data shows that you know, elder care benefits are down, not up. So that's very concerning. But the companies that are trying are doing a really good job. You see companies adding days to their bereavement policy, understanding that grief doesn't happen in 3 days and then you move on, who are doing really unique things, creating ERGs and support groups for their working daughters and sons. You know, I always say for their workers with parents, not just their workers who are parents. You see companies who are allowing, you know, paid days off, or subsidizing a few days of like a rehab or something like that, so people can really be with their parents in those critical moments. So the companies that are doing well are doing really well. Too many companies aren't doing anything yet. And then some companies are treating elder care like I think basically they've just gone through their employee handbooks, and they've crossed out anywhere it said parents or said children and said family. But that's not enough, because elder care and child care are very different life stages. So optimistic, but frustrated would be my answer.
Okay, so you're in this space very deep. How would somebody, if they wanted to find a job with someone who had those benefits, who was good with those benefits, how would they go about finding them? I mean, besides just asking during an interview. And I think what I see in the business that I do is, if you ask during an interview, or you said, hey, do you have elder care benefits? Everyone says, yes, we do, but they don't.
Right.
So how could somebody find a place to work that did have elder care benefits?
Well, you don't realize you just delivered a really nice softball to me. So last year, Working Daughter published the first list of best companies to work for working daughters. Nothing like that has existed. And, you know, to be honest, I had hoped to publish 50 to 100 companies, and the list is only 10. And that was bad news and good news. The bad news was I could only get to 10. The good news was probably double that number of companies saw the application to be listed as one of the best companies and wrote back to me and said, wow, there's no way we qualify for this list, but we're working on it. And we plan to be on this list in 1, 2, or 3 years. So that was really encouraging. So this fall we'll publish our second list. So that's one way, like look at the companies that are making these lists. But yeah, I mean, going to people's, employee benefits website pages, seeing how they're talking about their employees, how they're talking about life stages. Are they just, like I said, talking about workers who are parents? Are they talking about workers with families, workers who have parents? And, anyway, we suss out whether or not a company has a good culture. But unfortunately, that's still, until that list grows, it's still a lot of legwork.
Right. No, that's good. And just so you know, I did my homework. So I
knew about the list.
I lobbed that softball on purpose. Okay. I don't want you to think it just happened. Now, one of the things we talked about earlier was about disrupting caregiving. Mm-hmm. And, I know you have an idea about what disrupting caregiving means. And I have an idea. It's a little probably similar, but a little bit different. When I think about it, I think about disrupting the caregiving problems that we have in corporations. And I think you're thinking about it a little bit different. So let's talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Well, when I first started talking about disrupting caregiving, I was really, right after the book came out, I was really speaking to large groups of women. So I was conscious that I was talking to women about how they can make a really tough and sometimes impossible situation maybe a little bit better. And that bothers me, to be perfectly honest. And I'm really going hard now at the bigger levers, right? At the companies and the legislators to talk about the fact that they're the ones who should be doing this. It's unfair of us to put it on the women themselves. However, my motto is, control what you can control. And so until those big changes are made, how can women go through this experience better? And so when I talk about disrupting caregiving, my point is caregiving will disrupt you. And we haven't, we just talked about how the conversation is increasing, but many of us hit this point, right? We either come into caregiving through what I call the creep. So you're going along and your parents start to need a little more help. You notice the mail piling up. They stop driving. You help with the groceries. They need help with chores around the house. And you don't realize that you're a caregiver. You just are acting like a good daughter or son. And it creeps up on you. And all of a sudden, maybe I'm projecting. You wake up one day and you're really cranky. And you can't even, and you don't know what happened. And it's because this is creeped up on you and you just were being a good daughter. And all of a sudden, if you were to stop and look, you've assumed quite a big responsibility. So
it's kind of like that boiling the frog in the cold water.
Exactly, the boiling the frog. Yep.
And they turn up the heat and all of a sudden you're boiled.
Yeah, right. But if a frog were to look at that pot, he'd say, oh, that water's bubbling, I won't jump in. But if he's in the pot, he doesn't even see it coming.
Same way with caregiving. If you looked at it, you'd go, oh, that didn't.
Yeah, you'd run. Yeah. And then the other very common entry point is the emergency phone call, right? You're going along, you're not thinking about this at all. And you get the phone call, someone's fallen, there's a bad diagnosis, somebody's been taken to the hospital, and then boom, you're in it, right? So caregiving will, and so people aren't thinking about it. The other thing I always talk about is I grew up playing with baby dolls. I grew up imagining what it would be like to be a mommy someday, right? It was something I saw, I aspired to, and I thought about. I didn't grow up playing with elderly or, older adult dolls. And I actually didn't even see caregiving in my own family, not because my parents weren't adoring sons and daughters, but because back then, we have heart disease in our family. And back then, all 4 of my grandparents died in their, by their 80s with a pretty quick cardiac event. Both of my parents had heart disease and lived for, 20, 30 years after. So I didn't see caregiving because there wasn't an opportunity for my parents to provide caregiving. So many of us don't realize like this is going to happen to us. And, the other cliche around care, not cliche, but the other common phrase we all say is people in the caregiving industry is the Rosalind Carter quote, right? That there are 4 kinds of people: those who have been, those who will be, those who were, and those who will need caregivers. So people don't realize like this is coming and it is going to disrupt you. So what I try to explain to women is if we can plan for it, if we can see that it's coming, if we can have more conversations about this, we are more likely to be able to disrupt it before it disrupts us. And of course, there's plenty of caregiving that A, you can't plan for, and B, you can't control. We are talking about illness and aging, and we have no control over those two things. But we do have the ability to plan around senior living and understanding the different types and having, as many conversations as possible, and our parents are willing to have, and to educate ourselves on the cost of assisted living, the difference between assisted living and nursing homes. We can plan legally, we can do financial planning. We can make sure we've got all the medical information in place, the proxies and the, insurance cards and the medication lists, and you see your parents sorting their pills in those big plastic boxes. Find out why, find out what they're taking and why, get the list. So there are things we can do. So control what you can control. So that's what I'm talking about. The other piece is I hear from women all the time that their life as they once knew it is over, that caregiving ended their hope, their possibility, their career. Well, caregiving also ends. And so part of disrupting caregiving to me is learning how to live in caregiving and adopting a different mindset. Yes, this is not the life you ever imagined or maybe wanted, but what you woke up today is your life. So how can you accept it versus resist it? And then that's another way that we can disrupt caregiving. So, own it because it's happening.
I think you're spot on with the fact that we grew up with the babies as young girls in the ages that we were, and didn't grow up. My grandparents, as I've always talked about, my 4 grandparents that I had, just one day kind of disappeared. I got the call that said, "Hey, by the way, your grandmother died." Oh yeah, okay. Where's the funeral? It was that there wasn't any caregiving. Now, part of it was maybe my parents were caregiving, but by that point I was out of the house. So I didn't see what they were doing, and it wasn't something that they shared with us. Mm-hmm. Now, I also think I did something with a colleague of mine. Her name is Laura Davis. I did a podcast with her. She's been in caregiving all of her adult life. Well, she's been in the senior industry all of her adult life. But the reason she got into it is her grandparents lived across the street from her. Mm. Well, we're a global society now, and very few families are living across the street from each other. And so we're not seeing it that way either. So yes, maybe they died younger when we were younger, but now they live on opposite sides of the country on different coasts. So we don't see it. So we talked about this too. And I know when you talk about disrupting caregiving, the points that you made, one of my concerns, because I come from business and, come from the financial world, I'm concerned about the economy around caregiving. So first off, as you mentioned, the working daughters who can't grow their own careers because they've stopped to go caregive, like they used to stop to go have a baby. Right. So there's that. But I also see that sometimes by the time they get to that age, they go away for caregiving and they don't come back. Mm-hmm. Because maybe then they reach retirement age, or they say, you know what, I just can't go back. And mm-hmm. So I get concerned about our economy if large corporations are not taking care of their employees who need to care for their parents. It's
really, really concerning. And that's part of the reason I focus on, when I branded Working Daughters, everyone said, what about the sons? And it's actually not that big of a split. It's a 60-40 split, women versus men. The percent of women might have increased recently in the latest round of data, but still, there's a good percentage of working sons out there. The reason I focused on daughters was because I believe men and women have different challenges in their careers that impact their caregiving years. And for women, oftentimes it's that they've already taken some time off in the workplace, and then they may potentially take time off again. And oftentimes when you do take time off, to parent or to have a baby, there are financial consequences. There shouldn't be, but there are, right? You could be mommy tracked. You could have, put yourself in more of a, slower, career mode or that kind of thing. So if you're looking at women, and you potentially could be earning less on the dollar just based on your gender, and then, even more based on the color of your skin. So if women are already potentially earning less and therefore putting less into their retirement funds, and their 401ks, et cetera, and then they potentially step out of the workforce again for elder care, or get tracked again, on the slow track because they have financial responsibilities, and or they leave. The average family caregiver is a woman in her late 40s, early 50s. If she leaves before she's retirement ready, and those are peak earning years too, right? Like your 40s are like, this is when I'm going to make my money. And all of a sudden, you're flying to Dallas or driving an hour to your parents, and you're not performing in, the way you are. And then women are, on average live longer than men. So how are they paying if they're not putting that money into their, their long-term plan themselves? Who's going to pay for these women when they need long-term care, and the men aren't around? So it's very much an economic issue, and it's very disconcerting. And the statistics of how many women, older women, live in poverty, it's staggering. It's scary.
Well, and not only that, but we're also seeing another piece of an undercurrent that's coming in the demographics of what we call solo agers. And so these are people who are coming in that have never married. And I'm going to think about women in this example. So they never married, they never had children, they don't have any nieces and nephews, they don't have any sisters and brothers because they've outlived them. But before they get to that outlived part, they had to take care of their mother because maybe they were an only child, but they don't have anybody to take care of them either,
right?
And by themselves,
right?
And that's a big wave that's coming on. And I think we see that solo ager coming in, especially on the female side, because of the fact that in the 70s with women's lib, if you will, then they didn't have to have a male in their lives to get a car or a credit card or buy a house. So there are other reasons to marry besides financial reasons, but those financial reasons went away. And now here they are. And if they've added on the top of that, taking that time off to go take care of parents and then stayed out of the workforce, it's a problem.
Yeah, it really, really is. And I mean, and if you look at one of the things I also talk about to women, I think because I'm always just looking for the award for most depressing speaker, is that you just can't predict what's going to happen. So I hear in the working daughter community all the time, like, this is too hard, and do you think I should quit? And my answer is always, do you have enough money to live 20, 30 years? Are you set? Then if not, find a way to make it work. It is hell. Don't get me wrong. It is one of the hardest things. And when my parents, because both of my parents were diagnosed with terminal illnesses on the same day, I went I hadn't even left one hospital when I got a call from another hospital. So working while caregiving was brutal. And it was the last thing I felt like doing, because you're literally dealing with life or death. And then you're going to work and you're, in meetings where you're talking about paradigm shifts and, parallel pathing and all that corporate stuff, right? That maybe had meaning the week before, but it doesn't have meaning when you're talking to hospice. So if I could, but I was the breadwinner for our family, so I didn't quit. So my mom died, and they both got diagnosed in 2014. My mom died same year. My dad lived till 2017. It was a few good years until his dementia really kicked in. And then I was on that roller coaster again of canceling business trips, not showing up well at work, emergency room visits, and he passed in 2017. Well, so he passed July of 2017. Well, February of 2018, I'm 51 and my husband's 52, and he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
No.
So 8 months after I thought my caregiving years are over and now I can double down and start, making up for that money, I became a caregiver again, and cancer caregiving is a full-time job. And 13 months later, I was widowed.
Right.
And shudder to think if at any of those points when I wanted to jump out of the workplace, if I would be in big trouble right now. Big trouble. Right. So there's divorce, there's death, there's all kinds of life, events. So we have to make this compatible. We have to.
Right.
Yeah.
How can we help corporations understand this? And that kind of goes into, tell me what you do with Working Daughter, and how does that help just the general public as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I started the best companies list was really building awareness. And we also have National Working Daughters Day, which is a grassroots effort, which falls in November, Family Caregiving Month. So a lot of what I do is just awareness building to really make sure that organizations understand that these caregivers exist because, for a whole host of reasons, it's often invisible in the workplace. So there's the awareness building campaigns that we do just to elevate the conversation. With companies, I do a number of different, basically, I'll do anything they want. I just want them to take care of their working daughters and sons. So often what I do is I just come in and I work with their ERGs, I do a book talk, whatever it is, just to get in the door. And I remember I was at one really large tech company out in Silicon Valley. This is pre-COVID. And their women's group invited me in to do like a lunch and learn, talk about the book. And they had a pretty big group of people in the room, more people on Zoom. So it was a good crowd, but it was a very big organization. Mostly women in the room, a few men. After I spoke, the sponsors took me out to lunch and they were like buzzing. And they were so excited because one of the top C-level guys walked in the room while I was doing my talk up front. I didn't even notice him, but everyone in the company noticed him, and he had tears in his eyes. And he was telling people afterwards that he was taking care of his mother. And so even just inviting me in to talk about the book and address, your all women's ERG can lead to, somebody walking in a position of influence. And that's just going to humanize it. And that organization, has continued to have caregiving support and events going on. So it can be that simple.
Right.
But I also, I go in, and with some companies, I go in and I train their managers. One company in the financial services industry has me train their financial planners because, most financial planners are white guys in their late 50s and 60s, and their clientele more and more are people like me. And we're saying, you don't get me. Right. And so we're walking out, and one, they're not getting the business, but two, these women who need it aren't getting the financial advice that they need. So I work with companies, like I said, almost any way, at least to get them aware.
Well, I agree. I love your story. I love it. And we're going to finish up here, but I do want to tell you one thing. You and I could compete for most depressing speaker. So when people ask me to speak, they say, we'd love to have you speak, but could you not talk about death? So just so you know, that's kind of my thing, is to try to slip death in, because I think we don't talk about death enough, and I'd like to normalize it. Totally. And again, we could go on and on and on. I am crazy about your services that you have. I'm crazy about what you've done. What is your website? How can people find you?
Simple, workingdaughter.com.
What an easy breezy one. That's great. So Liz, I love having you on. I'd love to maybe even think of some other topic and we could do this again, because I'm so glad I found you, and I appreciate your time because I know you're really, really busy. How old are your kids now?
They are now 18 and 20. So
you're still in the thick of it.
I'm parenting by text. You can't, this is a podcast. Yeah. Just held up my phone. It's just so funny. It's still full time. It's just a different mechanism and different problems.
So my oldest is 39 and I still parent by text, just so you know. It just doesn't stop. Well, it was great to have you. And I really, really appreciate your time. So we're going to close here. Thank you, audience, for joining us. And again, this is Cynthia Perthews with Boomers Today. Please join us next time as we navigate issues that affect the boomer generation.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.